Hey guys, it's Erica Galinas with Century 21 Affiliated here for our Ask the Agent segment for this week. Today we're going to talk about post-closing possession, which sounds complicated, but really all it means is once you've sold your house or bought a house and you've closed, how soon do you get the keys and are able to move in? It's up in the air. People have different needs. Buyers want different things than sellers, and there's always, dates when you have, if you're doing a domino where you have to close this one and then close this one, sell your house, buy a new one, those kinds of things. It can be, I don't want to say tricky because it's usually not too complicated, but it can be kind of dramatic, I guess. It can be emotional. There is a tremendous amount of stress, not just in terms of buying or selling a house, but in terms of actually moving your stuff. So packing and when is it going to be ready? And, we have to wait 3 days, so I have to take a shower and all these different kinds of things. So as part of a purchase agreement that you're either putting in on a house you want to buy or one that you might accept for a house that you're selling, price is important. There's all these different kinds of things. Closing date is important, but post-closing possession is actually a different part of that, and certainly something to pay attention to. So how it normally works is, best case scenario, you go to closing, you're the buyer, you get the keys at the closing table, the seller moves out that same day, you leave closing, go to your new house and unlock the door. Oftentimes that is what happens. People are often able to organize their, the sellers are able to organize their moving out on the same day as closing. Because, generally we have 30 to 45 days planning time. So it's not super complicated for a seller to move out the day of closing. However, it doesn't always happen. I know I have a lot of sellers that are anxious about it. Like, well, when we close, I'm still going to need a couple days to move all my stuff out. They are being cautious because what if it doesn't close? I have sellers all the time show up at closings in like U-Haul vans with all their possessions. If for some reason a property doesn't close on the day it is supposed to, it's delayed a couple days, or we're waiting for some kind of paperwork thing. I mean, anything can happen. Most often you're closing on your closing date, but you are not always. So when you have a seller that is more cautious about not having a place to live for 2 days because they got to get the check for their closing so they can go rent their place or they can go move away or whatever it is, sometimes they want a couple extra days from closing. Historically, and this was before my time, but I've had a number of older clients, usually selling, where they say, oh, well, before when last time I bought a house, which was like 30 years ago, we got 30 days post-closing to live in the house, which I have not seen anything like that since I've been doing this, almost 10 years. But apparently it was standard back in the day where a seller would apparently have 2, 3, 4 weeks to move out of their house after closing. Certainly convenient, certainly gives you plenty of time to figure out what you're going to do and pack all your stuff real nice and, maybe to leisurely move out date. Unfortunately, most buyers are not particularly interested in giving sellers an additional 2 weeks or 30 days of time in the house after closing. There is one reason. They're not just excited. They're not just being jerks or anything like that. The reason is that as of the day of closing, they are now paying the mortgage for that property. Things are expensive enough now, not even just with our recent, price increases, but just in general, things are expensive enough now that mortgage payment divided by 30 days can, add up, I don't want to say to a significant number, but it can add up to something important. I mean, 30 years ago, maybe your mortgage payment was $600. Well, divided by 30 days, it was like $20 or something like that. But when you have mortgage payments like we have now, let's say, I'm trying to make the math easy, divisible by 3, an $1,800 mortgage payment, which seems a little crazy to me, but it happens all the time. Divided by 30 days, that's $90 a day that they are paying for the seller to live in the house rent free. So a lot of buyers nowadays aren't particularly interested in giving you, more than 1 or 2 days to move out of the property. From the seller perspective, I mean, obviously it's to their advantage to stay a couple days. And like I said, have closing, know your closing, know where you're going, leisurely time packing up and getting out the door without worrying about this other part. But a seller has to keep in mind that the buyer is making that mortgage payment for the property while the seller is living there. So the other side of that, the seller comes back with, okay, I want to stay in the property 3 days after closing, just to give them enough time to move out and everything else. And the buyer says, cool, you can have your 3 days, but you need to give me $100 a day for every day that you live there. depending on, it's kind of a math problem. Mortgage payment divided by 30 days times 2 days or 3 days, you can kind of come up with a number. But that's usually rounded off to $50 or $100 or $200, depending on, what that mortgage payment is going to be for those buyers. So sellers, often it is to their advantage. They often want those extra 2 days, but they often have to then agree to pay the buyer for those 2 days because the buyer is technically, making that payment for the house. I mean, again, it's not $1 million. It's not even $1,000 usually, but it is something that the buyer is out of pocket. A buyer often looks at it when you have 30, 40, 45 days knowing that this closing is coming up. There's not really a huge reason why you shouldn't be ready to go on the day of closing. I mean, there's always stuff that happens, like you can't move into your apartment until Monday or, something like that. But in general, you have excellent time, excellent warning for when this closing date is going to be. So from the buyer perspective, it's like, hey, you can have those couple days. I'm not sure why you weren't already moved out or at least planning to move out that day, but I get it. You can have this other couple days, but you have to give me, $200 for those days or something like that. And that seems to be the most fair solution to that. Again, back 30, 40 years ago when mortgages were like $5, nobody really cared if there were a bunch of extra days because it's like $1 a day. That's not true anymore. It could be $50, it could be $90, it could be $110 a day that they're paying for these houses, and the sellers should reimburse them for those couple of days. At least that's the buyer position. Certainly some buyers are like, okay, fine, I don't care. Some sellers are like, I already moved out, we can close whenever you want. But when you have those kinds of, I don't want to say conflicts because that's too strong of a word, but when you have both parties have those kinds of concerns, the easiest way to do it is to just get the seller an extra couple days, but also then get the buyer compensation for those extra couple days. The other thing that makes people nervous, buyers nervous about having post-closing possession by the seller is that even the most, careful, kind, wonderful seller who took care of their property every day for 40 years and it's immaculate, when you move out, stuff can happen. So when you close on a property, seller signs over the deed, buyer signs their loan documents, everybody's on the same page. The buyer technically owns the property as of that date. They don't have possession, they don't have keys, but they own the property itself. So if a seller is moving out and there's an accident or a mistake and, you're moving your bed frame down the stairs and you gouge out the drywall, well, now the buyer technically owns a house where there is a gouge out in the drywall that wasn't there when they closed. Anything can happen. A tree could fall in the house during a storm or a pipe could burst or anything like that. Those technically become responsibility of the buyer once they close on the property, but obviously that is not something that is necessarily caused by the buyer. And the buyer wants to be made whole by the seller. They're like, hey, you accidentally busted a hole in the drywall when you're moving your bed. You need to take care of this for us. So sometimes if sellers want post-closing possession, what a buyer will ask for is like an escrow, meaning basically that you set aside $500, $1,000, whatever it is that you guys work out, to be held by the title company until such time as you get the keys, you're able to check out the house and make sure nothing has gone wrong after closing. So I'll make something up. $1,000 in escrow for post-closing possession. Seller's moving out, they accidentally bust a hole, like I said, bust a hole in the drywall, moving a table down the stairs. So they figure out that to repair the drywall, it's going to cost $300. So buyer gets the keys, sees the hole in the drywall, figures out it's going to cost $300. So from that escrow, $300 goes to the buyer for that repair. $700 goes back to the seller because there's no other reason to hold on to it. The house has been delivered in, shape and plus consideration for this damage that was done. Oftentimes, lenders, agents, and title companies do not want to deal with escrow funds because what can happen is that you get a seller that's kind of being a jerk or a buyer that's kind of being a jerk, and you scratch the drywall, just the paint, no damage, just a little scratch in the paint. As buyer's like, I can't believe you scratched my wall, this is going to cost me $50,000 to fix. And the seller's like, dude, I'll buy you a gallon of paint. It's going to take 10 minutes to paint this wall, whatever you want. I'm not giving you $50,000. And then the buyer and the seller start to get into it. And they're, and usually this is because you have parties that are either kind of jerks anyway, or there were some prior issues with other parts of the contract. Again, not even necessarily anything bad, but even when you have little things like that, selling and buying can be so stressful for the parties that they can escalate rather quickly. So If a title company has an escrow and the buyer says, let's just go back, they punched a hole in the drywall. The buyer says, I talked to a guy and it's going to be $800 to fix. And the seller's like, well, I talked to a guy and it's going to be $300 to fix. And then the buyer and the seller have a disagreement. So that entire time, the title company is holding on to this money. They have no legal power to decide who is right. The agents are usually going back and forth and, well, let's, settle it at $600 or, they're trying to figure it out. But agents, title companies do not want to be in the middle of an escrow deposit. So those are frowned upon, although they are fair, I would say. Those are frowned upon because they can get so tricky so quickly, and then everybody's in the middle of a big mess, then we're hiring lawyers, and there's all kinds of nightmare stuff. So buyers can certainly ask for a post-closing possession. Some title companies, some agents don't want to deal with them. And then in which case I'm not even sure, you would talk to a different agent or probably the managing broker for your real estate agent to see, if maybe they can find somebody else to help you, if maybe they have a contact at the title company that can get that resolved for you. My recommendation as an agent, overall, buyers and sellers, turn over the keys at closing. It avoids all of these problems. Move out by 10 a.m. on Monday. You get to turn over the keys, you drive away, buyer gets keys, they go to their new house, everybody's happy, there's no trouble. But if, in fact, a seller is concerned that a property won't close for some reason, that's the only thing I can imagine they could be concerned about, and they want a couple extra days to move out, then it is my recommendation that the seller pay the buyer or offer to pay the buyer the amount of their mortgage for those 2 or 3 days after closing. Everything is negotiable. It's, depending, my advice depends on whether or not I'm representing the buyer or the seller. If I'm the seller, I'm going to start with 2 days post-closing for free. If I'm a buyer's agent, I'm going to go with keys at closing, and then we negotiate it from there. It's kind of one of those things, you negotiate on price and inspections and different things, but that post-closing possession can be something that can be very important to people, and is certainly something, that you need to think about. So it seems complicated, and I know I just said a bunch of stuff about escrows and all kinds of things, but it's not really complicated if all the parties involved can just sit down with a calendar and be like, okay, I got 40 days to move out. I'm moving into this house. It's my boyfriend's house, and so I can move in whatever I want. So ahead of time, blah, blah, blah. Figure out those things before you either make or accept an offer to try to, combat some of these problems that may come up. So that's what I have on post-closing possession. If you guys have any questions or anything like that or any comments, please text me anytime, 219-765-2062. You can also email me at hsbyerica@gmail.com. That stands for Home Sales by Erica. If you have any questions, suggestions, recommendations for Ask the Agent questions, I've been doing this a long time. I'm sure I have some kind of answer for you, even if the answer is, I think it's this, but I'll find out. Certainly, call me, text me, email me, comment down below. I always monitor those. If you have somebody who's buying or selling a house, a friend or something like that, please share this video with them so they can get some information on this post-closing stuff. Also, please like and subscribe to my channel. I do my market updates every week. Next week, I am doing Dyer, so that'll be up on Tuesday, kind of the Dyer real estate market update for the past month. And then next week, we'll have another Ask the Agent on a topic I haven't quite decided yet. It's fall, the market's changing a little bit, so we may have some different questions, but like and subscribe, and I hope to see you then. Thanks a lot, and have a good weekend. Hey guys, I'm glad you're enjoying my videos. If you have any questions about buying or selling, but I'm not in your area, I have connections to an international network of realtors who would be happy to help. Give me a call, text me anytime, 219-765-2062. I'll be happy to give you the name of a realtor in your area. Thanks.